I remember one time this same dude that I'm talking about and his mom, I used to stay out at the apartment building at Heritage Place doing work and stuff like that. Sometimes in the summer I'd stay the weekend or stay a week or whatever to do work and make money and stuff like that. But there would be times that her old man wouldn't show up for at home like on a Friday or something, or maybe a Saturday, and she'd know exactly where he was at, and she'd be like, "Come on, we're gonna take a cab and go to your mom's house," because her old man used to party uh, with my dad and stuff like that. So sometimes he would come home on Friday or Saturday. He would just stop over by my dad's. Then she'd want to take a cab and go meet up with him and stuff like that. And we did that many a times. And or she wanted to go to the store or something like that. Just whatever, we would take a cab or something. Especially if it was real cold in winter, and sometimes it was too cold to walk to the store, so she'd want to take a cab from Heritage Place and go to the store. Wouldn't be that far away, but it still made a world of difference. Where you wouldn't have to walk in freezing cold. But we just rode in mini cabs, mini city buses, hitched on mini cars, mini buses, mini UPS trucks, things of that nature. And but on the UPS truck, you wouldn't have to hang on to the bumper. You could just sit on the bumper and hang on, you know. But you would only get a UPS truck like once in a blue moon, It wasn't like they were just constantly going down the street, you know what I mean? But we had some good times in them winters in Detroit City. And had some cold ass winters, I'm telling you. You don't know a cold winter until you spend the winter in Detroit City. then you can say how cold it really gets in Detroit. But just some good memories, good times, and catching that ride. You know what I mean? So we did a lot of that. Also in the city, people would you could pay people to take you different places back in the day. People that you knew or whatever, and they would take you. Because a lot of people back then, they just like to drive anyway, so they would just any excuse to get out and drive. That's what they would do. Sometimes people would just drive around and just be hanging out, just not going no particular place, just cruising the neighborhood. And so a lot of times you could catch a ride from somebody you knew or somebody in your neighborhood or something like that. And so, but in the city, it's a lot different than the country, because sometimes in the country, you could live far away from something. And then if you do, it's always good in the country to keep you two vehicles at all times, because if one breaks down, you still got transportation while you get that one fixed. And so that's something I did over the years. I've sold many cars. I've gave away many cars, things of that nature. But I was just speaking on, catching that ride. You got to really make sure, if you live in the country, you got to make sure you have transportation, especially if you're out living, way out in the country and stuff like that, away from a lot of stuff. But it ain't no thing in the country, people are really friendly, and you know a lot of people and stuff like that, you can get somebody to come and get you. But a lot of people just don't want to put anybody out as far as, asking for rides and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, they will ask for a ride, but I'm just saying, a lot of people like to be independent, meaning you don't have to ask nobody for anything. And that's when a lot of people get independence confused. And I'm going to give you a rundown on that real quick. So, in case you're confused about it, you will know. Being independent means you don't ask nobody for anything. You know what I mean? That's the real being independent. And some people's partially independent, halfway independent, 3/4 independent. You know what I mean? And there's just so many people that's 100% independent, Because to be independent, you got to be in a situation where you don't have to ask anybody for anything. You know what I mean? You don't have to ask nobody for a ride. You don't ask nobody for a place to stay. You don't ask nobody to help you pay your bills. You don't ask nobody to borrow you money. All that. That's 100% independent. But have everybody being in a tight spot here and there? Yes. You know what I mean? And has everybody asking somebody for something at once upon a time? Yes. But I'm just saying the independency, some people has it confused, you can't say you're independent if you're always asking people for stuff. You know what I mean? That's not being independent. Independent means that you don't have to ask nobody for anything, that you can figure it out on your own, and things like that. Not knocking nobody that has to ask, to borrow money or get in a bind and have to stay with somebody or ask for a ride. Because believe me, I did all of it. There ain't nothing. I can't think of nothing I haven't done, to be honest with you. So, I know how it is. I get it, and I know, the situation. But I was just, wanted to touch on the independence of a person. So, and that's our thoughts at Detroit's darkest times. And but that being said, uh, things like that, catch that ride. It can mean many different things, you know what I mean? Because if you're catching a ride and you're paying, then you're being independent, But just many a times in Detroit City, people has, fell hard on hard times and had to do whatever it took to get by. And a lot of people, may not understand the situations that people get into, just by, a day-to-day struggle and stuff like that. And I'm talking about way back when. But there's just times where if you're in a bind and stuff, in order to get yourself in a better position, You just have to do what you got to do. You know what I mean? And that's what a lot of people did back in the day, whether it being falling short on bus fare or, what the case may be. But, for the most part, people in Detroit back in them days, they knew how to, fall in a mud puddle and come up out of there. You know what I mean? And then survive. You know. And you ever heard that saying? Fall in a pile of shit and come out smelling like a rose. It's kind of like that. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people just, fell victim to hard times and stuff like that, and you just gotta swindle your way into a better time and a better place, you know. And to be a true survivor, there's a lot of things that Detroiters did in the past to still be around today to be relevant and to, pass the message on to folks. You know what I mean? So people who's listening to this channel would just, pretty much know my struggle. My name's Slick. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. And people would know my struggle just from the stories that I put on YouTube. And it's basically my life story. And sometimes I'll touch on different topics, whatever. But basically, this channel is created to tell my life story. So many years down the road, if somebody asks us about me or says what was he like and anything of that nature, you can just go to Detroit's Darkest Times and be a subscriber, hit the like and the notification bell, and you could just hear the story. But I will say this. Once I get enough subscribers, now I'd already put out a ton of, stories on YouTube, on my channel. But once I get enough subscribers, I'm going to do a full circle. Now, these stories has been something else that I've already put out. But you ain't heard nothing yet. So as soon as I get my subscribers where I want them at and get my following good, I'm going to make a full circle. We're going to start at the beginning. It only gets deeper in depth of my life story, and you just ain't going to believe the things that I went through, the things that I've done, the things that I've saw, the things that I heard, and everything of that nature. So I'd really like you to subscribe, be a part of the channel, grow with the channel, understand my story, and see where I came from. You know what I mean? And it's just a hellacious story, And you ain't gonna find no story like mine nowhere, Because each individual has a story. A lot of people choose not to tell their story. And but every individual has a story, but every individual has lived a different life. So truthfully, the ones who decide they want to tell their story and people's went through a ton of stuff through their lifetime, especially if they're up in age. And some people don't want to share their story, but I just feel like that me sharing my story is going to educate people on where I came from, what I went through, and what I've lived, and to get an understanding of Detroit City as a whole. Because it's going to have, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, that being said, stay positive, keep your head up, be a part of Detroit's Darkest Times on YouTube. Treat people the way you want to be treated. And help people out when you can help them out, no matter if it's buying them a cup of coffee or what it may be. Help folks out when you see people in need, and good things will happen to you. You know what I'm saying? So, that being said, we're going to end this segment right here. We appreciate everybody listening. Be a part of Detroit's Darkest Times. Grow with the channel. Support the channel. Many stories to come. And make sure you catch that ride. We out.